Everyone. Thank you for joining us on our webinar about rail freight in the West Midlands. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We've got a number of attendees joining us now, which is great to see. So we'll get started in just a couple of moments whilst people have had a chance to join. For those of you who are joining us now, we will be recording this webinar and it'll be posted up on the internet later on our YouTube channel and also through our website. So if you need to pop out or you want to share the information with colleagues later, do look out for that recording and you'll be able to access it, if not later today, then certainly later this week. And if you want to have a copy of today's presentation slides, please do let me know and Phil and myself can get those over to you later today. It's quite interesting looking back at the topic for today, construction rail freight in the West Midlands, because I think if we'd been running this webinar maybe 5 or 10 years ago, we wouldn't have had a huge amount to say, because traditionally the West Midlands has been an area where we've seen perhaps a little bit less construction rail freight than others, possibly because of its proximity to the East Midlands and indeed to the Peak District, which has tended to make rail a less viable option. But what we've seen recently is that trend very much turned on its head. A great deal of interest in running more construction rail freight into the West Midlands, new terminals opening, and really a sea change in how we've been able to service the area. So I think it's really timely that we talk about this today and bring a bit more focus onto what rail freight is doing and what more it could do. We also recently worked with the Mineral Products Association to produce a brochure on construction rail freight in the West Midlands. Between us, we've circulated that brochure to local politicians, planning officers and opinion formers across the West Midlands. So we've been trying to share the word about what rail freight is offering and what more we can do with people on the ground. And if you haven't got a copy of that brochure, please do let us know. I think it's on our website. We can certainly share the link with you later on. So without any further ado, therefore, let us get into the meat of our event today. I'm delighted to welcome both our speakers, Lucy Wooten, who's Head of Grand Railway Collaboration in the West Midlands, who's going to be talking to us about the Grand Rail Collaboration, what its aims and objectives are and how it's been supporting freight. And then Chris Swan, Head of Rail at Tarmac, who's going to be talking to us about the moves they've been taking to increase their market presence in the West Midlands, new terminals, and what's more is needed to really, stretch that envelope further, do more and help support the economy of the West Midlands by bringing in more goods by rail freight. We will have plenty of time for questions. So if you have a question on the presentations or indeed anything relating to construction rail freight in the West Midlands, please do ask them. You can most easily do that using the Q&A function or the chat function. So please do keep your questions coming and we will take all the questions when we've seen the two presentations from Lucy and from Chris. But therefore, without any further ado, Lucy, let me hand over to you to take us through your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maggie. I'm just going to share my screen with you all. Okay, hoping you can all see that now. Okay, perfect. So, afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucy Wooten, and as Maggie said, I am the head of the Grand Railway Collaboration in the West Midlands, or the GRC, as it's more commonly known. I'm here today to speak a little bit about what the GRC is and also how we're supporting with freight. So often when I'm asked to speak at events, I take the assumption that people know very little about the GRC. So we'd like to start with a bit of a brief overview as to who we are and to give you all a little bit more of an insight. So what is the GRC? Well, it's a rail industry alliance to shape and deliver change to the West Midlands transport network for customers and the region. The GRC was launched in spring 2019 with the ambition and a bit of a new approach to the delivery of rail services, looking to bring together sort of Network Rail and the various train operators in the region alongside local government officials to ultimately deliver better outcomes for our customers. The GRC is designed not to be constrained by sort of contractual structures and frameworks that exist within the industry, and to really look at how we can introduce sort of collaborative working practices for the benefit of passengers and freight customers. The approach to this has really been accelerated in the recent years and has been made much easier with the changes to industry structures and the incentives that has been brought around by the pandemic. And we will continue to sort of actively try and embed the benefits of collaborative working into future industry sort of structures. So membership of the GRC includes all bodies responsible for the delivery of services to customers in the region. So the rail operators, we've got Chiltern Railways, West Midlands Trains, Avanti West Coast, Transport for Wales, Cross Country and GWR. And then we also have membership with Network Rail, Rail Freight Group, Rail Ops Group, the West Midlands Rail Executive and also the DfT. Our customers are represented by Transport Focus, and we also have the University of Birmingham who act as kind of a innovation partner. So this slide gives a little bit more detail about who's involved in the GRC, and the photo there is a photo of all of our board members at a recent strategic away day that was held earlier in the year. And then on the right hand side, this is a bit of a snapshot of our strategic plan for the year, and that circular diagram there shows the headings from our strategic plan that were born out of that away day that we held earlier in the year. And I guess the purpose really for including this today is just to demonstrate the variety of areas where the GRC is involved and where we're looking to sort of make improvements and ultimately bring benefits to customers. There's a number of objectives that sit underneath of each of these headings, but I'm actually the only full-time member of staff at the GRC, so we have to be realistic in terms of our delivery. So we sort of said that we would agree to deliver 3 key priorities at a time, and at those current priorities are the delivering closer working across Birmingham city stations, so New Street, Moore Street and Snow Hill, and how we can get them more aligned in the sort of customer proposition and the experience that customers have when travelling through those stations. Facilitate the delivery of a one-team transport sort of ethos for the Commonwealth Games that are being held in the summer, and then looking to develop a transport integration plan for the region, supporting a seamless travel experience. So that's looking at how customers are able to get from A to B in as easy and straightforward way as possible, and how they can integrate with different modes of transport seamlessly, and that they've got all the information that they need. Of course, as I've said, there's lots of other objectives that sit under these headings. It doesn't mean that they're just parked and not being worked on. They are. There's lots of sort of development and sort of groundwork that's being done, and then we've got a forward plan looking at how we bring those up the priority list as we go forward. So how does the GRC fit in with freight? So the GRC area is vitally important for rail freight in the West Midlands and has a real opportunity for future growth too. Since COVID and the pandemic, there's been a real uncertainty about customer and passenger demands and rail use going forward, and kind of what travel patterns are really going to look like. There's definitely been a real shift towards the hybrid working, with working from home being much more common, and people coming into the office maybe once or twice a week, with actually 5-day travel commuting kind of being a bit of a thing of the past at the moment. Whereas freight demand continues to grow very strongly, and it's an area that has really grown significantly during the pandemic. And also, as I've mentioned previously, Rail Freight Group are members of the GRC, and recently Rail Ops Group have become members too. I think it's really important as well to sort of make a point here that the GRC really doesn't want to duplicate any of the sort of good work that's going on in other groups in this space. There's often quite a lot of duplication of work in the industry, and it's not efficient to work in that way. So really what we want to make sure is that we're not doing that, and that instead we're sort of providing to the industry and helping to look for areas where the region may really benefit from some freight growth going forward. And then in order to sort of actively support the continued growth of rail freight in the sector, the GRC will actively sort of facilitate the closer working across the industry in timetable planning and looking at capacity usage and ensuring that this is aligned across both passenger and freight markets and that it meets the needs of both requirements. We'll support improved access to the principal GRC rail terminals, support the development and the delivery of the small consignment sort of rail-borne logistics solutions, and this would be looking at the use of sort of rail stations and passenger trains, and where there's unused capacity, looking at whether or not we're able to securely transport parcels on trains on existing passenger services, and maximising the sort of potential for rail infrastructure enhancements by really focusing on the benefits that this can bring to both markets. And as policymakers and the wider logistics sector sort of get to grips with the scale of the challenge around the UK's carbon reduction targets, you know, the GRC wants to actively champion the further decarbonisation of rail freight, and will support this by looking at the future electrification of the core diesel operated routes and the electrification of links into sort of key West Midlands rail freight terminals. A number of challenges that get identified through this are the need to really balance that passenger and freight growth and sort of making sure that we're meeting the needs of both markets. There's a real desire to move towards kind of the standard hour timetables across the network, and we need to ensure that any timetable changes mentioned previously are aligned and are developed in collaboration across all industry partners, so that we're making sure that they're not in conflict with one another. Looking at any sort of bottleneck areas and ensuring that any changes we make maintain performance standards, and that's always plays a key factor in any decision making with timetabling, and that we can use both the passenger and freight benefits to really justify the investment and future investment into this sector, and look to work with freight industry to ensure the strategic alignment. So from the away day, one of the key things that we took away that we want to work on currently is looking to plan this sort of end-to-end trial for freight on trains within the West Midlands. So this is that sort of parcels on passenger trains concept, and looking at whether or not we would be able to plan a trial for that within the West Midlands. And ultimately, the measure of success there would be that we have this sort of integrated parcels on trains proposition, and that we're utilising any spare capacity that's within the region. The West Midlands region and area is extremely congested in terms of rail, and it's also a very urban area, and therefore we feel like it would be a really good test bed for future trials in this area. So that was my presentation today. I hope you found it useful, and I know that there's a Q&A box and we'll be taking some questions, but my contact details will also be there should you wish to speak to me offline after the event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. That was perfect. And even though you know we know what's going on in the collaboration, it's always helpful to hear it and to share a bit more information about the work that you have been doing on freight, even though your priority topics for this year, not least with the Commonwealth Games only weeks away, I guess have been keeping you fairly busy.
Definitely got a countdown to the games now.
Yeah, sure. Indeed so. Okay, let's move on then to our second presentation from Chris Swan, Head of Rail at Tarmac, who's going to talk to us about what they've been doing to grow rail freight in the West Midlands and the next steps. Just a reminder, please do keep your questions coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Let me just see if I can seamlessly go into my slides. Can we see those okay?
Perfect.
Yeah, lovely. Okay. Yeah, so thank you. And I think really the first point to make is really just to re-emphasize and probably talk a little bit more in detail about some of the things that Maggie mentioned there in terms of, you know, we excuse me, with regards to the West Midlands, which is somewhere where I think that if you looked at our strategy as an industry, and if you looked at our strategy as Tarmac, you know, we are now operating a significant number of trains from various local quarries into the West Midlands in a way that it was probably not considered particularly rail freight friendly territory previously. I'll talk a bit more detail about one particular example in a moment, but the West Midlands has become extremely crucial to us from a rail freight strategy perspective, and largely builds on, I think, some of the work that we've done at Tarmac in expanding what we do by rail. But I think also, if you looked at others who are no doubt on the webinar today from the construction sector, Birmingham as a key urban market is therefore somewhere we want to move more materials in by rail. The success of the construction sector in moving more materials by rail has been to target those urban centres. I think traditionally it has been London and perhaps to some less extent Manchester, whereas I think going forward, all major urban markets will want a rail-fed solution for the movement of construction materials. So I think with that in mind, we're absolutely thrilled to support the work that the MPA and the RFG have done in producing the brochure. I think it is vital that we ensure that we have conversations with local markets and not just campaign and lobby on a national basis. Clearly national strategy is vital to growing what we do, but making sure that we make those messages effective within local communities and within local cities and within local urban areas really is crucial. And it's great that we've got such a document that we've publicised in the Birmingham area and having events such as today. So really good that we're able to do this, and having a conversation in Birmingham and the West Midlands as part of a wider national strategy is really important, I think. Okay, so a little bit about us for those who don't know. I'm conscious that most probably do, but Tarmac is a materials supplier of a number of key construction materials across the UK: cement, aggregates, asphalt, ready-mix concrete, building products. We are part of the CRH group, so a global construction supply company with a local brand name, effectively, which Tarmac is. And then you can see there some key details around what we have nationally, for those who don't know. And then just continuing the national theme for a moment, we have a rail capability map, which shows the extent of our national network. And as I mentioned earlier, our strategy very much more and more is to move more material by rail, focus on urban environments so that we're able to take large quantities of produced cement or aggregates or both from one particular location into major urban centres, into our depots, and actually move forward, but by letting effectively the rail freight operations take a greater proportion of our aggregate and cement deliveries, which are raw materials for our end products. So we've been extremely successful on that. Last year we moved our highest ever amount of material by rail. It would be nice if we could do even more this year, but certainly with a growing network, bigger trains, and demand that wants more and more of this rail material, we continue to see successes in the area. Okay, so a little bit that's kind of us nationally, and I think, as I said, conscious that certainly a healthy proportion perhaps of those on the webinar are aware of that. I wanted to really sort of focus on what we're doing in the West Midlands, and Washwood Heath is an absolute game changer for us, and fundamentally a great example of what we would like to do from a model perspective in as many places as possible. So a little bit of history on the site for those that don't know. This was previously an automotive yard where cars were gathered from the local plants, put on trains and largely sent to docks. But I think there were also parts for the plants that came in as well from around the supply chain, both within the UK and Europe. Was also, on a personal level, unfortunately, the scene of my first SPAD, not my personal SPAD, but when I did my first week on call Unfortunately, a driver did go past a red light in Washwood Heath yard, so I have quite an interesting history with the site. That said, what we have now, fortunately, is an absolutely fantastic facility. We've modelled it on some of the sites that we have in other places, and it's, as I said, it has made a fundamental change for what we do in the West Midlands. When I started this job, the West Midlands, as I mentioned earlier, was a site where most of our deliveries to customers were made through reasonably long distances by road. The Peak District and Leicestershire quarries being reasonably close by, and various other plants being reasonably close by, meant that it was a bit of a desert from a rail freight operation perspective, with just our site at Small Heath taking a small number of trains. Obviously, we've completely changed that now, in that we've opened this facility in the middle of the city. Trains are then able to come in from Mount Sorrel and Tunstead to supply the aggregates for the plants, and then we're able to make the short deliveries to customers from site when we've had the material in initially by train. So this is absolutely fundamental for our strategy in the city going forward, and pleased to be able to talk about it. And now it's kind of working properly, and all the ready mix plant is almost finished, and we're pretty close to being able to bring material in to supply that as well. And the asphalt plant has been running from last year. So obviously this is a pretty significant investment and a pretty significant site, but as an example, both I think of our commitment to the city, but also a great model for something that we would like to see rolled out, both personally from a Tarmac perspective, but I'm sure there are other colleagues from the industry who would like to look at similar models elsewhere, where we're able to supply those urban environments clearly through rail connected sites. Just wanted to zone out a little bit then, and this is a piece from the brochure. So those who've seen either today, I see it's been posted in the chat, so thank you for that. Either today or previously, you can see that there are now effectively 6 businesses receiving material in the West Midlands by rail freight, and this is just from a construction perspective. Obviously, there are a number of other non-construction terminals. There's ourselves in our partnership with ABP at Hams Hall, and then obviously again at Washwood Heath at the Birmingham asphalt plant, and as part of the GRS rail joint venture at Small Heath. Mark and the team at Cemex have done a great job of opening their site at Small Heath as well. Hanson have got a rail connected ready mix plant at Lander Street, which most people I'm sure will be aware is also the site of the large Freightliner container terminal. And then Breedon have got the cement and aggregates depot up there in Walsall. Obviously, HS2 has formed a part of this strategy. We are delivering material by rail through these sites for HS2 as part of the strategy. But I think it would be wrong to say that the only reason we now have progressed a significantly more rail-centric delivery model into the city is because of HS2. We are pushing it. We are hoping to do more. We are continuing to strive to make modal shift happen, and we can't make that happen without more terminals. And Lucy referenced the point, and thank you, that making sure that we have paths in order to provide material into those terminals is absolutely crucial for doing what we need to do. I think it's important to remember that not all of these terminals have 24-hour operational capabilities because of all sorts of reasons, and therefore it is absolutely essential that the quality of the paths coming into the terminals allows us to operate the trains effectively, sustainably, and in line with what we have. So I'm sure that there will be more and more demand for rail freight terminals in Birmingham. The growth of the industry within the city is pretty significant. So it may not be that this is the end of the terminal development, but I think it's also vital that we make sure that the capacity that we need from a rail inbound perspective fits with what we're allowed to do at the terminals. I think it's also referenced within the document, but worth saying that we do need to also consider more capacity at the other end. The ability to rail connect more quarries will also see a greater proportion of rail material that comes in, which is really important, and something that we want to work with the new Great British Railways on to think about how we can think about the production end as well as the receiving end, and realise that this is a focus on the West Midlands. But in order to have more material come into the city by rail, it is important that we have more ability to put more material into a train at the other end. So that's really something we want to think about going forward, about the full supply chain of how do we rail connect more quarries? Have we got sufficient urban terminals in which to offload? And if we haven't, how can we support the growth of that? And then is the railway supporting with sufficient capacity in the middle? I think it's also just worth, as we talk about key urban environments, decarbonisation and air quality becomes even more important, and it is part of rail's tremendous sell that we do offer a much more low carbon delivery into customers, and therefore modal shift becomes absolutely vital for everybody in their attempts to decarbonise. What I would also say, though, is that there is a piece here that means that modal shift is not enough if the rail sector doesn't do enough to change. So one of the things that we've mapped out, as you can see, is what we expect and how we plan to go about rail's net zero journey. Now, this is a Tarmac plan, but clearly we need the industry and our key supplier partnerships to buy into this. We've made some requests around emissions data for next year. We're looking very hard at what we do in the terminals, both on our shunt locos and general terminal operations. And for anybody who saw a couple of weeks ago, we launched the Rail Freight Terminal of the Future competition in partnership with a number of industry partners, including 3 freight operators, some leasing companies and a university. If anybody'd like more info on that, please let me know. But the basic principle is that we're looking for ways of digitalising, automating and decarbonising rail terminals. And one of the chosen sites that we'd like to use for new innovations is the Freightliner terminal at Landor Street. Not a construction terminal, which I'm conscious we're here to talk about, but very much central to what goes on in the West Midlands. So our own operations within the terminals is very much part of our own roadmap. Loading and offloading of trains is again probably an obvious one, but somewhere where we're looking to improve what we do. Thinking about mainline operations, you'll notice that they're fourth and not the only thing. Clearly, is the network going to be electrified? Is it not going to be electrified? Is a crucial question going forward, and how we can reduce the amount of carbon that we use on the main line is crucial, clearly. And then the last point is moving people around the network in order to run the railway. I heard a stat the other day that freight operators believe that around a quarter of their carbon comes from actually moving people around. So that's an interesting stat that we want to work with them on, and very much work with them on in the West Midlands to really try and drive further benefits of rail freight. The benefits of using rail freight are there for the city. The benefit of moving construction materials into the city by rail freight is there for all to see. But that doesn't mean we need to stand still and not continue to push harder to do more and do it better. I think, Maggie, that is the end of my presentation. So thank you. But I think we're going to do Q&A now. Is that right?
We are indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. Really interesting. And Chris mentioned there the Rail Forum Terminal of the Future event, and I know some of you are hopefully engaged on that. I'm actually in Birmingham on Thursday speaking at the launch of the first of a kind funding, which is the government's innovation funding, and there's a big pot of available funding for innovation and R&D in rail freight. So hopefully that will also lead to some useful outcomes and projects. Right, let us turn to questions. We've got a couple of questions that have come in. I think both actually for you, Lucy. Firstly, what is the relationship between the GRC and Midlands Connect with regards to freight?
Yeah, so Midlands Connect currently isn't a member of the GRC, so we don't work that closely with them in terms of what the GRC are doing. A lot of the GRC initiatives are very more short-term, medium-term initiatives that we look to deliver, whereas Midlands Connect looks much more longer-term. But we do need to ensure there is alignment, and we have been having conversations with Midlands Connect about either the future role of whether or not they do become a member of the GRC, or how we just ensure that we're kind of aligned and that we're keeping in contact with each other about what we're working on, and making sure, as I mentioned in my presentation about that duplication of work, that we're not duplicating on anything that we're looking to do.
A link to that, Lucy, obviously, you know, a lot of the trains that come through the GRC area aren't wholly captive to it, and that's obviously true of freight, but also, you know, a significant number of the passenger trains as well. And how, as an organisation, do you balance that sort of desire to, you know, to coordinate the middle, which is only part of a journey for some of the trains?
Yeah, and that's really difficult, especially when you think about the West Midlands and how many rail operators all come through the West Midlands, and the experience and kind of the what a customer gets when they travel with each of those operators can be very different. And there are things that we can do that are kind of small differences, but when somebody starts their journey at one end of the country and travels to the other end of the country, and a very small part of their journey is just traveling through the West Midlands, it can make it very difficult. Yeah. But it's kind of bringing together each of those organisations to really look at what can we do within the West Midlands. So I spoke about one of the initiatives being the closer working at the stations, and I think that's really key. When you come to Birmingham, you've got 3 stations all within very close proximity, walking distance to one another, all 3 totally different, because they're all operated by different organisations in a different way. Their staff have been trained in a different way. The staff are all, you know, they're all in their own uniform and branding. But from a customer's perspective, it just adds to that confusion. And I think, you know, a lot of us travel on the trains a lot, so we're quite comfortable with that. We're not daunted by, you know, making connections at rail stations, whereas for some people it is very daunting, and you may get used to it at one station, then go somewhere else, and it's the whole experience is totally different. And it's just looking at little ways that what we can do there to really bring some benefits and make some changes that ultimately make it easier for our customers.
Will a collaboration, you know, have a role in future in terms of specifying franchises?
We're working very closely, so that probably brings me on to the next question a little bit about GBR. So yeah, we've been working very closely with sort of the GBR transition team about the role of the collaboration and sort of this alliance that we've got in future. And the GRC in particular has a really good setup, has excellent commitment from all of its members in terms of sort of attendance at meetings and sort of moving forward with some of the initiatives. And it's looking at how we can sort of make that the standard for alliances in other areas of the country, and also how we can then feed into sort of what we think the customer experience policy and should look like going forward as well. So yeah, we definitely don't have that at the moment. We don't have that sort of influencing power, but looking at the members that we have, and obviously the DFT are also a member of the GRC, we've definitely got those channels open to be able to look at that for the future.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And the specific question we've got is around GBR having a duty to promote rail freight, which, you know, has been promised, although we're yet to see the legal legislation consultation come out. But assuming that lands, what's your interface with that part of GBR's duties, and in terms of the growth target, which we're hoping that they'll be set?
Yeah. So we haven't had sort of specific communication with that part of it, but we are in continuous communication with the GBR transition team themselves and looking at what the future looks like and ensuring that the GRC is well placed to help in supporting the delivery of those targets. So I'm not sure exactly what our role will be in that specific area, but it's definitely an area that we want to be involved in going forward.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Chris, one for me, you mentioned obviously the forum, rail forum, terminal of the future, which is looking at the intermodal terminal as well as the aggregates terminal. And obviously, you've just sort of broken new territory a little bit by going into Hams Hall, which is an intermodal terminal at heart with a construction facility. So where do you think there are more opportunities for that kind of sharing of facilities?
Yes, and I think it does make sense. Our partnership with APP has gone very well, I have to say, in terms of kind of making that work. There are clearly some operational challenges because perhaps culturally a construction terminal and an intermodal terminal are not always kind of managed in the same way, but actually it's been really successful. And I think, I guess Hanson are obviously in Lander Street now as well. So there is starting to be I think, a kind of look towards those type of partnerships, and it does in some ways make sense. If you look, Maggie, the harder things are, making sure you've got a good connection into the main line, making sure it's in the right place, making sure that you've got, kind of planning to operate, and if you're already in an industrial area, etc., and already operating 24 hours, for instance, you've already got kind of a lot of the stuff covered. So, I think going forward, if we want to really change what we do and really push the ceiling higher and higher and higher in terms of, not just in Birmingham, but everywhere in terms of the amount of material we're able to move, I think looking at more clever collaborations like that are essential, to be honest.
And to what extent do you think we can intensify what we do? I mean, a construction terminal is, with all due respect, a fairly basic operation of unloading stuff, making stuff and selling stuff out the other side of it. To what extent, do you think you could do more intensive operations, or, there's a lot of talk about multi-story.
I think that's where sometimes the planning becomes important, because the more restricted we are but by when we can operate and what we can do within those hours, the more difficult that is, because I guess the more the more restrictions you impose, the more challenging that gets. I think it is if you look at somewhere, I know it's in London, but if you look at somewhere like Battersea, we've been able to save some space by having a bigger operation as a result of new technology, which wouldn't have existed. For those who don't know, we offload the train from the top of the wagons rather than from the side of the wagons with a kind of piece of kit, and we're then able to do a bigger operation. So I think more and more it feels like using space better becomes easier with more imaginative kit, and therefore that probably brings more collaboration potential in. But you're right that at some point there does become at some point you either have too many trucks, or you have you don't have enough room or whatever. But maybe and I think part of what we're talking about with regards to the terminal of the future operation is using space as effectively as possible has got to be part of that, because then it gives you more opportunities to do more and more places.
Thank you. A question in from Michael Whitaker. How can local authorities, particularly planning departments, help to support terminal developments by enlightening local members as to the key role that rail freight can play for construction materials in urban areas? So, I mean, Chris, let me come to you first. Your view on that. What more can we do to help
I guess
departments? What more could they do for us?
Yeah, I mean, Michael's obviously sort of nailed it in some ways as to why there's a brochure in the first place, because we wanted to, I think we were conscious when we had the discussion that, it's a lot of what we do from a lobbying perspective and from a strategy perspective takes place necessarily at national level. But actually, a lot of the planning for the terminals that we operate in, as you kind of allude to there, Michael, is done by local authorities and local councils, etc. And I think, you know, the nuance of our industry is clearly something that we need to make sure that we get over to people, and that they recognise the benefits and opportunities that come from doing more rail freight, but why that isn't always as easy as we think. And I suppose it's just making, you know, people instinctively, I think, get passenger rail because, well, they use trains, so therefore they understand how it works. You know, people don't tend to understand freight trains unless you explain it to them. And I'm talking the nuance of the market and the terminals and all that kind of stuff. But hopefully we've got a pretty clear and pretty convincing message that when people are kind of, we do talk to them about it, then often we do get support. So I think, you know, not exclusively, but I think people understand we're trying to do something that they support, you know, broadly, and therefore it's about making people aware. You know, I'm sure we do have some people occasionally who aren't totally supportive, but as a general rule, the more people we understand why we're doing what we're doing and how we're doing it, then the more support we get.
Yeah, thanks. And Lucy, from your perspective, because obviously within the GRC you're dealing with, you know, local stakeholders, how do you think we bring that influence to bear best?
I think for me, it's about sort of that whole communication piece as well, and sort of being open and transparent with what it is that you're working on, so that then you're able to, they're able to have their say and stuff as well, and able to sort of be involved in any future planning. For example, like timetabling, when we've been looking at timetable changes, some of the key issues that we have is when people feel like they're the last to know and they don't know what's going on, and it's actually bringing them on board. And, you know, yes, we work in the industry, but it doesn't mean we have all the answers, and sometimes it's going out and speaking to people and really understanding actually what's important to them, and then letting them sort of be a part in the future as well, to let them have a voice in kind of what the future may look like.
And as a GRC, are you engaging, you know, out into planning departments around the sort of the future of rail across the West Midlands, or is that something that, you know, would be done by different parties?
Yeah, we are engaging with planning departments for looking at what the future of rail looks like.
Yeah, okay. And so I think, you know, for us in freight, obviously, you know, this is there's the issue on a specific site where there's a, you know, a request for some planning, and, you know, the issues that may or may not surround that. But I think more generally things around zoning of land, adjacent land, protection of sites that could be used for rail freight in future. Those are the sorts of, you know, messages I think that we've been trying to get across, and I'm sure from a passenger rail, you know, there must be some similarities in that. Yeah.
Okay, it's probably an area that we could probably do a little bit more work in as well, but I think there's definitely scope to sort of open those conversations up again.
Yeah, okay. And then, you know, without wishing to take chair's prerogative too much, and, you know, people who are on the call, you know, perhaps last orders for questions, you know, if you want to ask them, please do get them typed out quickly. But you mentioned infill electrification, you know, and I know we know that getting into Hamsall and Bift and some of the other terminals is going to be really important to unlock end-to-end electrified journeys, which we could do, you know, almost immediately, actually, if those links were in place. How do we get that unlocked, do we think? And Chris, what's the, you know, what's the learning points from your trials of the retractable overhead, and where you think that might have a role? Either of you.
Well, I think to take the second question first, I think what we were very conscious when we trialed the electrification kind of retractable catenary was that really what we were trying to answer was the exam question, which I'm sure is asked in strategy departments all over the place, which is, well, you know, what are we going to do about freight, and how do you offload a train? Well, actually, I think what we've proven with the system that Furrer and Frey had, and it's not our system, should be clear, it's something that we were involved with doing at Wellingborough, is that you know, a freight terminal is capable of having kind of overheads up and you know, and offloading a grab train from an aggregates point of view, which is probably, we felt, about as difficult a challenge technically as they were going to get, you know, being able to move the catenary and then put a grab in the wagon and still offload it. So you know, technically possible, yes. So at least that question has now, I think, been answered. There are some concerns around, you know, cost of connecting it to the main line. I don't have any data on that because I don't have any data on it actually, but I know that the fur and fray view is that it is sustainably, from an economic point of view, buildable within the depots, but we need to make sure that it is also kind of, you know, able to be connected into the main line, but the principle is there. So if there were a fully electrified main line tomorrow, it doesn't have to be the only solution, but freight depots can now switch to a system. It doesn't have to be that system, but there is now a system that means it can operate, which I think, Maggie, is one of the exam questions that previously probably would have been held against us as to why freight won't benefit from electrification to quite the same extent. What are you going to do in the terminals?
Yeah, absolutely. And Lucy, you know, in terms of I hate to use the word lobbying, but let's use it, you know, to try and get more electrification in the West Midlands. What's happening so far, and how can we help support that message?
Yeah, and it's definitely something that we do need to keep pushing forward with. And I think it's sort of using the local area as well. So there's sort of clean air zones and things that are being implemented in city centres, and how rail can support that, and ensuring that, you know, that all of these different objectives are all working towards the same end goal, really, and how if we were able to electrify the rail network, especially sort of within city centres, that would really drive forward that clean air zone initiative that's ongoing as well at the moment. So I think it's getting those conversations and sort of getting the right people lined up to sort of look at how they can work better together.
Yeah. Okay, question just coming in. There seems to be lots of ports and rail terminals which have issues with space, and trying to release containers elsewhere seems to be an issue too. Who's the best person to speak to regarding intermodal collaboration? That's from Patty at PD. So I guess, Chris, that's an unfair question from you right now, because you're not in intermodal. So I guess from a Birmingham point of view, it'd probably be Freightliner in terms of the city centre, and then Maritime and ABP out in the regional terminals. I mean, I think we are seeing the beginnings, unfortunately, of port congestion beginning to bite again, and including in the inland terminals and the warehouses. So I fear this is a bubbling story. But Patty, if you want to drop me an email, I can certainly send you some contacts in the Birmingham area if that would be helpful. Okay, right. I think we have exhausted those people who've asked questions on the Q&A and the chat. And I've probably exhausted the questions that I've been frantically scribbling down as the two of you were presenting, although I could probably keep going all day, but I won't. So in the chat, we've got a link there posted to where the brochure that we mentioned at the outset is referenced, and so you can, if you haven't clicked on that already, please do so before we end the webinar, or if you forget, then just give me a shout afterwards and we can certainly get that out to you. If you want a copy of the slides, please let me know. We can get those distributed out to you this afternoon, and the recording should be up on our website, if not later today, then certainly this week. A bit of shameless advertising, so please do forgive me. The Rail Freight Group Awards are open for entries at the moment till the end of May, so please do get your award entries in. If you are a member, or if you've been working with an RFG member on a project, then you're well able and very welcome to enter those awards. Categories are on the website. Our next in real life meeting is on Wednesday the 25th of May in Manchester, in a very nice hotel at Salford Quays overlooking some water. We do have a barbecue the previous evening. Obviously, if you're in Manchester in May, it could be a damp sausage, but nonetheless, we have ambitions for a barbecue. We've got speakers there, including Department for Transport, Transport for the North, Transpennine Route Upgrade, and an afternoon tour around Trafford Park for those of you who would be interested in that. And then the other event before the summer is, of course, the multimodal event for those of you in intermodal ports, 14th to the 16th of June at the NEC, and we've got the usual Rail Freight Group Pavilion there, so do come and say hello if you're planning to be at that. But that is all from me. So just forced me to say a huge thank you to Lucy and to Chris for their time and input, and indeed for their ongoing support for rail freight in the GRC, and Chris for your efforts in increasing rail freight in the West Midlands area. Hopefully we will see you online or in real life at an event very soon. Meanwhile, you get 10 minutes back and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you very much.